Let's forward through that. All right, Leo and Carl, thank you for having me. Very happy to be here and to share whatever insights I can offer. I will use PowerPoint on and off. It allows me to explain myself more effectively, and so that people know more or less where I am, or also important for me to know where I am. So with your permission, I will do a share screen. Seconds. 1 second. I hope you all see this. 1 second. This is it. Yes, so the topic I was asked to talk about is the U.S.-China rivalry. Where is it heading? Now, I agreed earlier that I'll be speaking for 20, 25, 30 minutes or more than that, because at one point I'm probably will be sick of listening to myself speak, and I want to open this up for a discussion. If you want to interrupt me while we talk, please don't hesitate. Simply interrupt. And let me start with a disclaimer, because at the end of the day, when we talk about where is this conflict, where is this rivalry heading, we're doing a bit of forecasting, and I have a disclaimer when it comes to this. If I've learned anything in international relations over the past 30 years or so, it is to come to this area and come to this subject with considerable humility, and one needs to be very humble about what he or she says, because nobody essentially did not predict the end of the Cold War. If you were with us in the 1990s, early 1990s, I would say, and you would be talking about the next great power rivalry, you would be talking about the United States vis-a-vis or versus an Asian power. But that wasn't China, nor would it be India. It was Japan. And, well, then, as we can politely put it, shit happens. And something happened with Japan, and it never emerged as a great power, at least not yet. So when you encounter these very strong, very powerful statements about the inevitable rise of China, of the inevitability of China becoming a great power or controlling the world order or whatever, pace yourself and be very cautious about those predictions. So, and even take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, and that I think is very important. But I have a second warning. Historical analogies are very nice, very tempting, but as one said once about political polls, they're like a French perfume. It's fine to smell, but don't swallow. Because, yes, historical analogies can tell us quite a lot. The talk about the Thucydides trap, which is essentially a metaphor of great power rivalry, if you wish to call it that way, in the 5,000 years BC in ancient Greece, between Athens and Sparta. And what happened then, that Thucydides said essentially that the war began because of Athens' emergence as a new power, and the fear that this instilled in Sparta eventually led to war. And this talks about the inevitability of wars between great powers, especially between a rising power and what we call a status quo power, an existing power. So the warning is valid. Or the Thucydides trap warning is valid that, yes, if the United States and China do not act prudently, they might inadvertently sleepwalk into war. But at the same time, when people use very freely the analogy of the Cold War, one has to be very, very cautious, because the Cold War essentially was a unique phenomena, as is the current rivalry. Because the Cold War was unique in so much as this is the first time in modern history when a rivalry between two great powers ended without a major war. Now, this rivalry too has its unique features. So one has to be very, very cautious in those comparisons, even though they exist. And people who argue that the Cold War, in terms of mindsets, mind frames, has no impact today, is also being ingenious. But one has to be very, very cautious about them. So what makes this current rivalry so different or so unique? Well, essentially, since, this is a very short, brief talk, at the end of the day, you have to put it down into 3 points, 3 bumper stickers. Essentially, it's the interconnectedness, it's technology, and yes, it is also China. And I'll touch on each of the points very briefly and quickly. Again, if you want to compare this to the Cold War, the metaphor that everybody talked about during the Cold War was that an iron curtain descended upon Europe. Well, it did, essentially. There was an iron curtain. There was very limited interaction, transactions between the West, the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, and the Warsaw Pact, if you wish. The transactions, there was very little interconnectedness. Move forward to today, I don't think I really have to explain how interconnected the United States and China are, how China is and Europe are closely interconnected. And this interconnection is vast. And it doesn't make necessarily only the United States dependent on China or vice versa. It's very complex, it's very complicated. It's hard to tell at one point where one thing ends and the other starts. Whoever reads international newspapers, follows international news, will see there's a lot of talk about how this rivalry is about technology, about who controls technology. But make no mistake, technology played a role even during the Cold War. And technology plays a role even more so in this current rivalry. A lot of it is concentrated today on the issue, and much of the attention is focused on chips. And since I'm no tech expert, I won't go into too many details about it. But suffice to say that when we look today at technology and why technology is so important, it is because that technology has a far more dominant position in our world than ever before. And there is a lot of uncertainty about where technology is taking us. And I'll give you a very small, banal example. AI, artificial intelligence, a lot of talk how it will transform the world. It could be, it is possible. But machine learning could make a huge difference. Once upon a time, not so long ago actually, once computers became developed, there was this tradition of letting the world champion in chess go against a computer. And to a point, and up to a point, usually the chess master, the human chess master, won. But once AI came into the picture and advanced computers were used in this exercise, the game changed. The AI system gave instructions that seemed to those human observers as bizarre, as odd. But all of a sudden, even counterintuitive, but all of a sudden, the computer would crash whatever human faced it, telling us that AI can perhaps come up with steps and measures that humans could not think of. Now, why should we be concerned about that? When it comes to countries with nuclear weapons, and particularly countries that have certain amounts of nuclear weapons or have reached the state of mutually assured destruction, and I won't get into this, but U.S.-China, there is some unclarity, even though there is presumption that the situation exists. I made the caveat. But the whole idea of mutually assured destruction is that because of this capability to destruct each other, for sure, nobody will dare to start using nuclear weapons. But what happens if an AI system devises a set of, puts into play a set of motions that actually could undermine this whole idea of mutually assured destruction and could give a first or a starter's advantage to a party that would start a nuclear exchange. This is where AI starts to be a bit frightening. And that goes beyond the point that AI and big data and all the things quantum give immense capabilities, be it in terms of intelligence gathering, be it in terms of human tracking, and I can go on and on and on this. And this creates a lot of, how I say it, people get very unsettled about it. And now I come to the third factor, and this is China. What is so unique about China? What makes it stand out, and why is it different? Well, it is. China has a unique, a different perspective on the world and on its place in it. And I say this from, make no mistake, I'm not a China basher. I don't utter words like CCP or the Communist China, China Communist Party, quickly and utterly, and I'm not disparaging. But one needs to try and appreciate the fact that China's worldview and the worldview of China under Xi Jinping is unique and different. And it starts from the recognition and from an understanding in China that it is at the epicenter of the world, that it is the Middle Kingdom, and that it holds, and its leaders hold, the mandate of heaven, Tianxia. This is a burden, make no mistake. This is a duty. This is a role that they have to bear. If it would be up to China solely, they would be very happy with little to do with the rest of the world. But this is a burden that they carry. And they view China with moral and normative superiority. It is no coincidence that they consider outsiders as barbarians. Again, not in a disparaging manner, but this is their world view. And with that, one has to understand, and I'm really trying to, not very nicely, try to put this into a very brief presentation. China is at the same time recovering from more than a century of humiliation. Starting in the 19th century with the imperial wars in China, with the British control of China, the Opium War, the Boxer War, and again, I don't want to get into the history. That's the story behind Hong Kong and Macau. And for a considerable period, especially even after China started recovering from the era of the Cultural Revolution and Deng opened up China. Even during that period of Deng, China, under his leadership, was known as bide and hide, not to display its intentions, not to try and presume that it wants to control the world or whatever. Since particularly the global economic crisis of 2008, China has become increasingly confident and believes that this is the time, and this is the worldview that Xi Jinping has instilled. This is the time for China's rejuvenation, of reclaiming its rightful place, taking up its duties on the world stage. And this is really, to what we understand, this is how China views the world. Now, China operates in this arena differently than other players, be it the United States, be it the Soviet Union then and Russia today. Yes, China, like the United States, seeks power and influence for different purposes and also in different ways. For instance, and one way to look at it, or let me say it this way, is to, this is a very common metaphor. China, in the West, we play chess. Chinese play Weiqi or Go, which is a different type of game, which you're trying to encircle your opponent to a point where you will be able to, through the overwhelming power of your encirclement and presence, you will have this overwhelming leverage that does not require explicit reference. You will do as requested. Now, victory is sought through psychological advantage. Avoiding direct conflict is the goal. Deceit is okay. Outright conflict is less so. And that is very different from Western thinking. Because in Western thinking, going to war is fine as long as you play cricket. As you are fair, you are honest, you're straightforward. Now, this does not mean that Chinese believe in deceiving, but if you ask them, or if you ask Chinese, what is better, outright conflict or a bit of deception, the answer is very clear what is better and what is acceptable. China operates on the world stage as an opportunistic, asymmetry-seeking, long-term player. It does not go in and try to necessarily get short-term gains. It has a long view, but it is opportunistic. And because of this understanding of Go or Weiqi, it seeks asymmetries, it seeks leverage, and it creates future opportunities for leverage in a way that we do not always understand and see, and by the way, in a way that not always they know necessarily what they're going to do with it. For instance, one of the main efforts of China today is exporting its digital infrastructure across the world. I'm sure most of you heard about Huawei's control or monopoly of 5G systems, cells. But that's not the only area where China invests in digital or IT infrastructure. Undersea cables is a major market for Chinese corporations, and they seek to control 60% of the international market within a few years. Now, they've passed a law in China where it is clear that China considers data and data collection as a matter of national security. What will they do with all that data? I don't know. I'm not sure they know. But Could it create leverage down the road, especially if they'll have the big data and quantum computers to process it and to do something with it? Perhaps. And this is where China could also create risks that others at this point might be underestimating. Now, under Xi Jinping, he has sought to restore national rejuvenation, and for that purpose, you can also see that this is a very assertive, very proud outlook of where China stands in the world. And therefore, it has pursued, by the way, what has become known as wolf warrior diplomacy, which essentially means that Chinese diplomats respond aggressively, to be polite, when other countries or other actors critique it or criticize it. And Xi Jinping has pursued this point personally. And we saw that during Corona, when they had no problem in demonstrating how they stand out. And for those who don't know, most of China's operations around the world are today vast, much more so, to some extent, even than the United States, and even combined with its allies. And to a large extent, when it comes to digital infrastructure, China is in a far better position than the West in many parts of the world. So where is it heading? What we see here, essentially, is a tech race, and we see a competition between what the US calls a rule-based West-led order, and as we speak today, the United States is convening its second democracy summit to demonstrate its view of the world. US strategy under the Biden administration has focused considerably on allies and partners, and that's why the democracy summit is so important here. While on the other hand, China promises a community of shared future for mankind, which is a statement that appears in almost all publications of the Chinese government, all the communiques it signs with. It had the Arab summit in December in Riyadh. All the statements included that, yes, we are establishing now a China-Arab community of shared future for mankind. This is the worldview that is based on the idea of Tianxia, of the heavenly mandate. And China is seeking increasingly, and this is very clear, to try and dominate and lead. And this is where it focuses a lot of its digital infrastructure and development activities on leading the global South. And it is challenging US and Western definitions of democracy today. And by the way, China says that by leading the global South, it is the democratic leader of the world because it commands more numbers. But there are question marks to what extent the global South really is following China, or is only trying to benefit from its development opportunities? That's an open-ended question. With all the concerns I raised earlier, I'll briefly present three likely scenarios, and I'll end here. The most likely scenario, to be honest, is what we see today will continue for some time. Protracted rivalry. It will be the defining feature of this era for the next decade or so, or if not more, just like the Cold War that dominated world politics for, 40 plus years. And there are two other possibilities. The West leads, or we see the emergence of a Sinocentric order. Now, the protracted rivalry could actually see the realization of the two other scenarios. That the protracted rivalry will actually create two spheres, a Western sphere and a Sinocentric order, or Sinocentric sphere. Although that sphere will be it won't be a Soviet sphere, it won't be an American sphere, it'll be a different sphere, because China could care less about what's going in, usually domestically. It will be different spheres. There will be, if you wish, a decoupling, which is the word that everybody's using, of disconnecting this interconnected world. By the way, everybody will lose from decoupling, and decoupling is already happening to some extent. Chinese policies are leading that direction in some areas, and definitely American policies. When the United States is trying to deny, by all its capabilities, Chinese access to advanced chips or semiconductors, because without those advanced semiconductors, China's ability to develop advanced AI and quantum computing and all those wonderful things will be limited, will be hampered considerably. So, to a large extent, one of them could be right, or all of them could be right. And let us not forget that something might happen that we do not expect at all. As I said, these predictions come with a disclaimer of humility and being humble. I think I'll stop here, right? I spoke enough.
Yes.
It was just fascinating. I didn't really look at the watch.
Yeah, we didn't look at the watch. It's fascinating. Yeah, if you can continue if you want.
Very kind.
I do have a question.
Please, go ahead.
If I can ask. Do you see more countries in our region of Israel, as we saw, that now China fixed the peace deal or going back to normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Do you think there will come a day when we see Israel is joining with China? From the point of view that, as I know, China doesn't deal with what you do in your country. It basically is like, come cooperate with us, and we don't deal without whatever you do with human rights or these matters. But do you think that, as we see, the U.S. of course is getting out of the Middle East? Are we going to see? Okay, we have Russia and Syria, but are we going to see China stepping in?
All right, that's when it comes to the Middle East, that's $1 million question that is very hard to answer. First of all, I would caution against those statements about the United States leaving the Middle East. I've heard them for the past 20 years. It reminds me like those who predicted that NATO will die 10 years after it was established. Well, it's actually nearing its 75th anniversary. And the same applies for NATO, for the United States disengaging from the Middle East. It's to some in the United States that's wishful thinking, and it probably will stay as wishful thinking, but not really going to happen. Because at the end of the day, you must ask yourself, why does the Middle East be such a dominating not only in the 21st or 20th century, but even much before they discovered oil and understood what you can do with oil, the Middle East was important, and it attracted international attention, through millennia. So, and the United States has traditionally been, for the past 100 years, engaged in the Middle East, on and off. But since, I would say, 1956, it's here. And I don't see it going anywhere so quickly. So that's one side of the story. The Chinese side of the story is a bit more complicated. China has considerable economic interest in the Middle East. It is energy, number one. And if 10 years ago it would be energy number one, number two, and number three, today it's more complicated. Because China is invested in physical and in digital infrastructure and in real investments across the Middle East. And yes, it has an interest in stability in the Middle East. And insofar, it has been very happy allowing the United States deal with that problem. And there are several aspects to this discussion. First of all, because of all the talk about the US disengagement, the Chinese are not sure that they really can rely on the United States to deliver, protect Chinese interests in the Middle East for much longer. So that's one thing. And secondly, they understand that they can score points in the rivalry with the United States in the Middle East. And the Iran-Saudi deal was to a large extent that not because of China, Iran and Saudi Arabia reached the deal. China was a facilitator, no doubt. It also did certain things to make sure or try and help this process to reach its conclusion. But one should not overestimate the role that China played here. The issue is, however, that this instills a lot of confidence in Chinese diplomacy. And they might be eager to do more along those areas. And when you consider the fact that alongside the Silk Road, or it's known as the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and along the digital Silk Road, which is all the infrastructure, mainly the digital infrastructure, China I've called them the diplomatic spin-offs, like TV series, of the BRI, the digital Silk Road, are new global initiatives. There's the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, and last week we have come across the newest one of all, the Global Civilization Initiative, Global Civilizations Initiative. I almost missed it. Now, These are there to position China, and they are part of China trying to establish a new world order or a different world order. So, will we see China trying to advance its good offices, so to speak, in other regional aspects in the Middle East? The answer is possibly yes. Would they be detrimental to Israel? Nothing good can come out of that for Israel. That's the point. Because some of the principles that it is marketing right now could be interpreted as not very convenient for Israeli interests. I think, yeah.
Anyone has a question, by any chance?
Who wants to argue with me? Or disagree, which is fine.
I can argue with you, but
Go ahead.
no other question. I would ask you another question, by the way. If we see the current war in Ukraine, and we saw that Xi Jinping was visiting Russia,
Yeah.
are we going to see China helping Russia in the war, or is it just speculations of the West? Well, you hear me? Because you're...
So, do you hear me well?
No, now we can hear you. Yeah, you were out for a second.
Yes, so I see. Sorry for that. China and Russia have a very close relationship. It's not an alliance, it's not an axis, but it's very close to it. Last year, in February 2022, 3 weeks before the invasion, Putin visited Xi in Beijing for the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, and the statement they issued, their very long statement, was titled No Limits Friendship. And then 3 weeks later was the Russian invasion. Were the Chinese happy with this development? No. Were they happy with how Russia managed this war? Oh, even not. More so not. And for several reasons. First of all, first and foremost, it's an issue for China. If there is one principle that China holds as holy in the international system, it's the idea of sovereignty and the territorial integrity of states. Because of the Taiwan issue, because Taiwan, from a Chinese perspective, is part of China, of mainland China. So Ukraine, they can't support the invasion of Ukraine. And in all the Chinese statements for the past year, you'll see very clearly that China does not support the territorial violation of Ukraine. Having said that, the worst possible outcome for China and for Xi, by the way, is that Russia loses. There's no worse outcome of the war than a Russian debacle. So here Xi is in a complicated position. Also, Chinese firms, as much as they adhere to the leader and to whatever, China and the China leadership does not want them to face international sanctions for cooperating with Russia. So it's an interesting game. But China supports Russia. Its narrative, it's like an echo chamber in terms of why did this war break out? No, it's not because of Ukraine, it's because of the West and NATO and the United States. So that's the story. And in this relationship, Russia has become the junior partner. That is very clear. It's very interesting, by the way, because, you know, China used to be the junior to the Soviet Union, and now they're switching places. And China is increasing its influence and presence in Russia's backyard in Central Asia. It's a very interesting situation.
I have a question as well. You talked earlier about the heavenly mandate, and I was curious, how does the Chinese concept compares to American exceptionalism? Because it sounds pretty similar.
Well, yes, the United States has a manifest destiny. But there is disagreement about, by the way, about how to translate that manifest destiny. Does it, you know, there's this wonderful debate that has been going on in the United States for more than 200 years over what should be the US role on the world stage. You know, as an example of democracy. Should it be a beacon only? A light for the rest of the world? Or should it go actively pursue and try to democratize the rest of the world? This debate has been ongoing for 200 years in the United States. I strongly recommend reading John Quincy Adams' 1821 speech on Independence Day, which is known as the speech titled The Monster, America in Search of Monster. You know, the United States should not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Because he was against that position of the United States conquering the world for democracy. 1821, not 1991, 1821. Shocking. So yes, there's a difference there. And by the way, the Chinese don't believe in conquering the world. Not at all. But they think that it's their duty to create harmony in the world. Harmony is in their image of how the world should be. That's the idea, that's the essence of a community for the shared future of mankind. And that is different than the American perspective and how it pursues it. And what China is willing to do to pursue this vision. And how.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question?
Behind the black brick.
A question before we finish. Someone? No? Okay. Bill.
So first of all, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Mr. Steiner, for sharing your knowledge with us.
Tommy.
Again, so we are currently revising some of our plans for the global activities. We're making some changes in how those events work. So we will be publishing updates on social media. If you're not following them already, you're welcome to follow them now on Facebook and Instagram. Stay up to date. And we hope to see you all in future events.
Thank you for having me. I'll just say quickly that those celebrating Passover, happy holidays. Those celebrating Easter, the same. And those celebrating the Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Kareem to all.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Good evening, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
The holidays go well.
Bye.
Bye to that one.